Hello and welcome back to Vintage Disney here on Brian's Things That Are Cool. In my first tribute to the Disney Channel video, as well as my Mark Twain video, I briefly mentioned a little film called Back to Hannibal, The Return of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Back to Hannibal premiered on the Magical World Disney at 7 p.m. on October 21st, 1990. It was arguably one of my first exposures to these classic Mark Twain characters, even before the Elijah Wood adaptation of Huck Finn 3 years later. It's a Disney title that hasn't gotten much mention as the years have gone on, and that's why I'd like to take a deeper look at Back to Hannibal, The Return of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. Back to Hannibal, The Return of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn is a what-if type of film. In this case, what if Mark Twain wrote a story where his two most famous characters grew up? Twain himself once remarked, "Someday it may seem worthwhile to take up the story of the younger ones again, and see what sort of men and women they turned out to be." Writer Roy Johansson takes up Twain's challenge of bringing the famous duo into adulthood with Huck, played by Mitchell Anderson, now working as a reporter, and Tom, played by RAPHAEL, having become a lawyer. When former slave Jim stumbles upon the body of Becky Thatcher's husband, the townsfolk assume that Jim killed him. Jim, innocent and scared for his life, runs off to find his old friend Huck to help him. Huck convinces Tom Sawyer, now living in Chicago, to come back to Hannibal to defend Jim at the trial, and Tom agrees. But he's not greeted too nicely upon his return to Hannibal by locals, who think it's a pretty cut and dry case of murder and that Jim is guilty. But soon, evidence of a plot to sabotage newly built paddle wheelers turns up, and it's clear something more sinister is going on. Classic beloved characters coming together to solve a mystery, it's a story that has it all. But the production of the film certainly had its problems. Back to Hannibal had a 19-day shooting schedule in St. Charles, Missouri, with 15 of those days seeing the crew bombarded by torrential downpour. May of 1990 brought record storms for America's heartland, and the Midwest was plagued with tornado warnings and hailstorms. The Missouri River flooded, took out homes, and even took out a levee and boardwalk built for the film. Set designer Rob Bacon watched in horror as his $60,000 set drifted downstream. Not only that, but the paddle wheeler they rented for the film, the Spirit of St. Charles, crashed into a bridge. That certainly put little annoyances like the sound of jets landing at the St. Louis airport across the river while filming a scene in perspective. Producer Hugh Benson, who had the initial idea for the film when he bought his granddaughter a copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer for her birthday, even questioned if the ghost of Mark Twain had it out for him. Ironically, 5 years later, another Disney Twain adaptation, Tom and Huck, which filmed in Alabama, would see similar hardships during production, but still made it out okay. Back to Hannibal brought $1 million into St. Charles, Missouri, and local shopkeepers took no issue with having to close their stores for a few days while filming. Not even when the film crew spread oak mulch on the cobbled streets to make them look old and dusty, which clogged the sewers when it rained. St. Charles, Missouri had the largest restored historic district in the state and is on the banks of the Missouri, which stood in for the Mississippi. The town's history was a sense of pride for locals, and over 600 of them were extras in the film. Mitchell Anderson and William Wyndham, who played Becky's father, even played tennis with St. Charles Mayor Grace Nichols when they weren't filming. Bringing these characters from classic American literature to life for an all-new adventure is a cast of actors who, despite a few issues here and there, would still make Mark Twain proud. Star RAPHAEL SBARGE learned of the pride Missourians have for their history the day he got cast as Tom. While still in California, SBARGE ran across a man from Missouri who he told he had just been cast as Tom Sawyer. The man supposedly stepped back, sized him up, and eventually said, "All right, you look right to play Tom. I definitely have to agree with this man." SBARGE captures the quick wit and silver tongue the character calls for, which is why I think it was an inspired choice to have adult Tom be a lawyer. There are a number of showcases of Tom's ability to get people to bend to his will throughout the film that are obviously a callback to similar scenes from Twain's book, like the whitewash fence story.
Hey, it's Aunt Polly's old place.
New owners have been keeping it up nice.
Fence could use a coat or two.
And SBARGE is still able to come across as likable, despite playing a master manipulator. SBARGE would eventually work with Disney again, being recognizable to modern audiences as Archibald Hopper, the character that turns out to be Jiminy Cricket on ABC's Once Upon a Time. Mitchell Anderson, fresh off of being gobbled up by a shark in Jaws 4: The Revenge, had done a few Disney films before taking the part of Huckleberry Finn, most notably the period piece Goodbye, Miss 4th of July. Anderson has good chemistry with SBARGE and certainly captures the rascally nature of the character, though I do question the idea of making Huck a newspaperman. Considering the character's hatred of formal schooling and wanderlust, I don't know how good of a reporter Huck would have made. And there seems to be a bit of character confusion here. Huck is reprimanded by his boss for juicing up a boring story, and it reminded me more of Tom's way of exaggerating stories in the book. Well, I guess Huck told some whoppers in his book as well. Still, Huck in the book seemed like he'd be more of a rambling roustabout type. Other characters from the original Twain novels making an appearance here include infamous con men and carpetbaggers, the King, played by Joe Bova, and the Duke of Bilgewater, played by Ned Beatty. The character traits seem to be switched in this version from what I'm used to, as the King here is a comical sidekick while Ned Beatty's Duke is the leader of the outfit. They also seem to be overall good guys despite being frauds. Still fun seeing these hucksters attempting to convince the townsfolk of their psychic powers, even if I prefer the more accurate depiction by Robbie Coltrane and Jason Robards in Disney's 1993 version of Huck Finn. As in the book, Becky Thatcher plays an important part as well. After all, her husband's murder is the focus of the movie. Becky is played by Megan Follows, who may be familiar to fans of period pieces as Anne from the 1985 adaptation of Anne of Green Gables. Despite the big hand she plays in the plot here, I don't think she's as fleshed out as she could be. You don't really feel the connection between Tom and Becky in this film as you did between Jonathan Taylor Thomas and Rachel Lee Cook in Tom and Huck, but in that case there was more to work with. Becky Thatcher's home in Back to Hannibal was actually the former home of famed frontiersman Daniel Boone. Paul Winfield reprises his role as Jim from the 1974 adaptation of Huckleberry Finn, which starred Jeff East in the title role. Once again, Jim's freedom is the main point of the story, but unfortunately, like with Becky, Jim isn't given a lot to do. Winfield is still able to turn in a strong performance, and I like that he plays Jim with intelligence that he can lack sometimes in the book. Knowing his story from the book, I found myself wanting to know more about his life as a free man. Unfortunately, it's a situation where you can feel the constraints of time put on the film, and Jim and a few other characters suffer for that. I was 8 years old when Back to Hannibal premiered on the Disney Channel, and it's certainly stayed with me in the years since. After seeing Back to Hannibal, I would go on to see Mark Twain and Me in 1991, Huck Finn in 1993, Tom and Huck in 1995, take a family vacation to Mark Twain's Hartford, Connecticut home, and eventually get myself a big hardcover edition of 5 of Twain's novels. I'll always have a soft spot for Back to Hannibal as it introduced me to the work of one of my favorite authors. But the movie does have a few problems. Other than time constraints leading to less than fleshed out characters, Back to Hannibal can be a little bit too sentimental at times.
Just do what you do best. I believe in myself. I do.
The movie ends with a twist, which I won't give away, but I think they should have stuck to the initial idea. Both 1993's Huck Finn and 1995's Tom and Huck committed to the darker elements from the book, such as child abuse and murder, but were still able to deliver excellent family films. I think Back to Hannibal, like most of the TV movies I've liked, would have benefited greatly if it had been made for theaters. Twain wrote for a younger audience, but there was also a rawness there that you never find in a made-for-TV movie, especially one made at this time. They do give a few nods here and there to the books, but I did find myself asking, well, what about this or that? As a story that creates something new with existing characters as opposed to directly adapting source material, you can definitely see the difference in the writing styles. I don't want to be too hard on it though, because I do legitimately like the film. It's just watching it now with a better understanding of the source material, I can see how much better it could be. It may be lacking the edge and wit of Mark Twain's original stories, but if you're looking for a fun, fast-paced mystery with beloved characters and a beautiful Americana feel, hop a ride on the next paddle wheeler back to Hannibal. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed my look at Back to Hannibal, the return of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. If you'd like to be kept up to date as to when I release a new video, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. And if you really want to be notified, hit that bell as well. I'm Brian, and I'll see you next time on Vintage Disney.